have 2 items on the agenda today. We'll be starting with our community engagement update. We will hear from Linda Jones from Housing and Neighborhoods and Mickey Fern, our consultant for this project. Linda?
Council. Thank you for the opportunity for us to come before you to give you an update on Mickey's work thus far. He will be providing you recommendations around the community engagement strategies. So without further ado, here's Mickey.
Hello, Mayor and Council. It's good to see you all again. I'm going to try to get right into it. Sometimes I spend a lot of time describing problems, and I'm not going to take time to describe problems. I think we've done that. And so this conversation is about actual recommendations or strategies as it relates to community engagement. The process of this changed a little. I think when we started this, I thought I would be able to engage many more community people prior to creating the recommendations. And I have talked to a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of cities across the country. But a sense of urgency about getting this done has created a situation where I've created the strategies. And then after your consideration and conversations, and when you determine what your priorities are and what the sequence is, then my intention is to engage the community in looking at the strategies and finding out what's missing, finding out what might be problematic. But I just want to let people know that because of COVID, a lot of other things, some things in my personal life, technology issues, I wasn't able to do the sequence the way I intended it to. But today, I think we have maybe 10 or 11 recommendations. And at some point in time, you will discuss those recommendations and give us marching orders about what to do. And then at that point, I'm hopeful that we might be able to create an internal community engagement core team, as well as a community-based team to help us flesh out the recommendations, again, to find out what's missing and to sort of enrich what these recommendations are. So with that, you can see this, these recommendations and strategies are a result of hours of discussions with constituents, city staff, elected officials, community organization, community engagement practitioners across the country. And what we're offering is a suite of strategies. And it'll be your responsibility to prioritize and sequence the implementation of those things. And so we'll wait for your direction on that. You've seen this before. The primary challenge here, or one of the primary challenges, is making sure that we have community engagement as an organizational value that lives in the heart of the organization. Right now, it seems to be a set of disparate activities throughout our departments, project-based kind of things, but the community engagement value is having a hard time fighting its way into the homeostatic state of the organization or the way that things have been. So what we want to make sure is that we create a government structure and culture that has community engagement at its core. And some of these recommendations are about how we do that. So one of the first things the city has come up with a definition of community engagement, but I think the council of the city has come up with a definition of community engagement, but I think the council needs to define what community engagement needs to be for the city of Raleigh. Otherwise, people will operate according to their own definitions and according to their own values. And these are 3 things that we've talked about. I'm not suggesting that these should be the definitions, but it's really important that we have a clear, well-articulated, communicated definition of community engagement. And I think that's pretty much the council's responsibility. I will certainly be happy to do whatever I can in doing that work, but it's ultimately council's responsibility. When we look at community engagement, and you've seen this before, we're looking at the city, or we're looking at the people who want to engage as citizens. We're looking at them as customers. We're looking at them as partners. We're looking at them as co-creators. We're looking at them as volunteers, and we're looking at them as stewards. So these are all the ways we can define the interactions that we have with constituents. All right. So as I'm looking at, as I've been talking to people, there have been several things that have been coming up over and over again that people are concerned with, that people are complaining about. The council has complained about it, city staff has complained about it, constituents have complained about it. And so I'm going to share those things with you because I think if our community engagement processes aren't based on values, just like I said about the definition, if we don't have strong values of community engagement, then people in the community and in departments and in the city will operate according to their own values. So these are the things I heard. I heard there's a lack of trust in government. I've heard there's a lack of honest and timely communication. I've heard that that we don't appreciate the kind of investment, we don't appreciate the investment of talent, time, and resources that citizens make. And I believe that citizens don't appreciate the talent, time, and resources that the council provides. So stewardship, follow through. People engage and don't always know what the result of their engagement was. Responsiveness, and that's about getting back to people. That's about, sometimes in public and community engagement processes, citizens say, my recommendation went in a black hole and never came out, and I don't know what happened. So follow through and responsiveness. Accountability, transparency, responsiveness, accountability. I have accountability twice. I have transparency twice. And continuous learning. And then the final one is healing and compassion. And you would not necessarily think about this as a core value as it relates to community engagement, but I hear a lot about people who get involved in public process, who are hurt by the process, who feel they've been trivialized by the process. And when those people go away, they don't come back. So at some point in time, we have to have some kind of mechanism that allows us to provide healing to people so that we are concerned about their investment and in participating in that healing, they come back. It's important to realize that all of these values are dependent upon each other. The value of innovation and the value of community building, the value of accountability and the value of trust. So if I could have done this, all of these would be circles that would be overlapping circles. And these are the things I think we have to pay attention to. Again, I think it's the council's responsibility to decide which of any of these things that they want to operate or that they want to consider to be core organizational values. When we make them core organizational values, then they serve as a filter. They serve as a filter so that when we're engaged in community engagement activities, that they are aligned with the values that you decide. Otherwise, as I said before, if we don't have those core values, then people operate according to their own personal values. So at some point in time, there should be some deliberation about whether these are the right values or not. I'm not saying that all of them are, but I think that these are the things I heard when I was talking to people, things that people didn't like about their experience with community engagement. Okay. So preparing for the journey, and I've been thinking about this a lot. When I've done innovation work in government, one of the things I've learned is that you can't impose new things on existing structures. In other words, the foundation that we have for community engagement and government in Raleigh has emerged over a period of time. And so what I'm thinking now is that we need to audit the structure and culture to see if the foundation that we're working on will support the new strategies for community engagement. If they don't, then we need to make adjustments in those strategies. And some of those things I'm talking about are the way the city is organized. I know this is a challenge you guys are looking at, but the length of council terms and the size of council districts, the historical evolution of community engagement organizations. So to prepare for the journey, I'm saying that we need to audit the structure and culture of what we're doing to make sure that we have a foundation that will support the new strategies. All right. Now, these are, as I've talked to people around the country, these are community engagement functions. Very few cities do all of these, but most cities do some of these. So I'm going to list for you the kinds of things that community engagement offices typically get engaged in. Assessment, and that is, and I've combined assessment with continuous learning. Assessment so that we're constantly assessing how our community engagement processes are working. The next one will be technical assistance to community engagement stakeholders. And that means that an office somewhere in the city provides technical assistance to city departments and community organizations. And by the way, I want to say that I don't mean to suggest at all that we aren't already doing some of these things. I'm just talking to you about what I've learned in terms of talking to people. So technical assistance to community engagement stakeholders, which might be city departments, community organizations, little constituent groups that are trying to start things. But the reality is somebody needs to be there to help community engagement stakeholders understand how to do community engagement. And then continuous learning and capacity building. You'll hear about this later, that the city is constantly changing. The city that Raleigh was 50 years ago is not the city that Raleigh is now. And we have to continue to learn about the dynamics and the diversity of our city. And we also have to be able to learn about new kinds of community engagement activities. But I don't think we can do this work without there being continuous learning. And we're already doing some of that. Certainly the neighborhood learning processes and those kinds of things are examples of that. Collaboration, we can't do this without collaboration, and that's collaboration inside city government, and that's collaboration with community organizations. But if you have departments who are doing community engagement separate from each other, and that creates some challenges, and it's not efficient. So what we need to do is to stress that collaboration, that the community engagement function is creating collaboration around community engagement. Communication, and boy, did I hear this, is that, you know, we don't hear from the council, we don't hear from city staff, we don't get information the way we want to get information. I mean, I think it's really hard when you're council and you've got a full-time job and you've got 200 emails and you get off work at 5 o'clock and you're expected to respond to those things right away. And I know that there are challenges around that. And what I'm saying about this communication function is that we need to find ways to communicate more effectively and efficiently. And I don't mean just a council, I mean all of us. Innovation and creativity, looking at new creative ways to bring people together, and this will be a strategy. But the question about these is who has the responsibility to work on these things? Creating a supplemental workforce, and a supplemental workforce is those constituents out there who volunteer, who do core work, but allow us to extend government services while minimizing impact on the budget. And I know that there are departments that have volunteers, and I think departments manage their own volunteer base. But I'm simply saying supplemental workforce is one of the elements that exist in community engagement offices across the country. Excuse me. Support of community and neighborhood organizations. So what about all those organizations that are out there doing work? When they have questions, who do they go to? When they need to interact with the city, how do they know how to do that? So a function of community engagement, and this is true across the country, is the support of neighborhood and community organizations that are involved in community engagement. Community building, and that's, you know, one of the things about living in a democracy is as you build a community of people who know and understand each other. But I think that there needs to be somebody in the city who has responsibility for imagining community building activities or working with other departments or community organizations around their community building efforts. And then equity and inclusion, critical. I've been reading a book called The Negro in the South that's about the evolution of Black people and things that are unbelievable. And I think as a city, we need to look back at our history and see how it developed to see how we got to this space. So these are community engagement functions. In cities that do most of these, all cities do some of these, and the cities that do most of these, the community engagement office either reports directly to the mayor if it's a strong form of government, or directly to the city manager if it's a council manager form of government. But the communities or the cities that do most of these don't have these things existing disparately in departments. They have somebody who has a responsibility for sort of coordinating all of these activities. So assessment, the first strategy, conduct periodic analysis of the effectiveness of our current public engagement activities, conduct internal and external benchmarking, and identify criteria or metrics to determine if public engagement activities and strategies are successful. And I think at this point, that doesn't fall into any department's responsibility. I think we tend to evaluate community engagement activities at the site of the activity. And then people are evaluating the activity based on how they feel. But rarely do we conduct experiences where we go back to people 6 months later to talk to them about how the experience has affected them. So strategy one is assessment. How will we know if we're successful? At the core of our community's capacity to effectively express their opinions are neighborhood and community organizations. Recognizing, strengthening the role of these neighborhood and community organizations is critical. These local associations are the most powerful opportunities constituents have to express their views. These organizations include block clubs, religious organizations, sports and recreation groups, youth, women's, men, seniors groups, advocacy organizations, etc. Now, this text came from a report that was done in 2004 about community engagement. And what was said in that report is this should be the responsibility of the CACs. It should be the responsibility of the CACs to work with these community organizations and their issues. And I think that there is some concern that maybe CACs, as they have evolved, and they've evolved unevenly in different places, have been concerned about the issues that they're concerned about, but haven't seen their responsibility as the umbrella organization to coordinate all of these things. And then there does need to be an organization that does that. Now, I also want to say in that that these are, and you've seen this before, these are all the activities constituents have expressed interest in. And the question is, did the CACs, as they existed, give people opportunities to get involved in all of these things, or did they narrow them down to a few things? And then who is responsible for determining which issues these organizations actually get involved in? But these are the interests that people have and the things that they said they wanted to get involved in, but they didn't understand the process for getting involved in these things. Strategy 3 is customer service, and that means increasing the potency and the capacity of the thousands of transactions that take place between city staff and constituents each day. Use transactions with constituents as a component of our engagement and communication strategy. Create goodwill by ensuring that those transactions create trust and a positive perception of city government. And that speaks to the fact that every employee in the city has a responsibility for community engagement and in their interactions with citizens, making sure that they're doing things that are sustaining the trust of those organizations. Continuous learning, and everybody needs to learn. The council needs to learn, city departments need to learn, constituents need to learn, consultants doing work for the city. We have a couple of major contracts going on with Dix and transportation. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, when those consultants come to the city to do community engagement, are they doing it based on their definition and method of doing community engagement, or is it based on hours? So I think we need to spend some time working with any consultant who's going to do work for the city so that we make sure that their community engagement activities are in fact aligned with what we decide our values and priorities are going to be. Continuous learning for community organizations and continuous learning for other stakeholders. Okay, so continuous learning and capacity again. Design and conduct community engagement capacity building activities for city departments to ensure that all city community engagement strategies and activities conducted by the city or consultants are aligned with our values. And the design and implementation of an equitable, culturally relevant, inclusive community engagement process for all communities. How do we learn how to do that? Things are changing so quickly that I'm thinking that we think that we know how to do things, but I think that we actually need to learn how to do some new things. Strategy 5, commitment to community engagement is one of the city's core values. It must be reflected in the budget. This is about funding and support. Community engagement is an investment, not an expenditure. We should examine how internal and external collaboration can minimize budgetary impact, but have maximum impact as it relates to community engagement. Seek outside funding for support of innovative community engagement activities and strategies. Use collaboration and volunteer activities and youth employment to allow us to extend service while minimizing budget impact. So I have a statement here that says, inasmuch as the current community engagement team does not have the capacity or resources to lead the implementation of all of these strategies, the city should form a city community engagement core team composed of appropriate staff from appropriate departments. I want to make sure that when I say that the community engagement team doesn't have the capacity, I don't mean they don't have the ability. What I mean is they don't have the resources, there are not enough of them. So I think we're going to have to create collaboration and cross-functional work if we're going to talk about implementing these strategies. We may, in fact, have an internal team to look at each of the strategies if you decide that that's what you want to do. Youth engagement, taking responsibility for producing the next generation of big citizens and taking advantage of the idealism and energy of youth constituents. Whenever we're planning something, maybe we should think about planning a parallel process for young people. Certainly this is true in parks and recreation with the development of resources and facilities because the young people are going to be the people who are going to be inheriting and using these facilities. So when we're doing things, when it's appropriate, I think we should create a parallel engagement process for young constituents so that we get their ideas and we also are suggesting to them that we value their input. Work with city departments and youth service organizations to design and implement civics experiences that encourage civic stewardship and spirit and the sustained engagement of young constituents. Strategy 7, equity and inclusion. This is really important. In my conversations with people, I'm finding that Raleigh is sort of sorting itself, and people who have like values and cultures and ethnicity are living in almost exclusive cadres, as are white people for that matter. So there's some things that we need to understand about equity and inclusion. First of all, understanding intersectionality and collaboration with stakeholders. Understand the unique evolution of race in Raleigh, understanding how the unique evolution of race in Raleigh has impacted Black constituents. The Black experience in Raleigh is different than the Hispanic experience, the Native American experience, the immigrant and refugee experience. And as I've been reading this book, I'm trying to understand what is unique and special in Raleigh about race. And it's real clear to me that we need to understand how race has impacted the engagement of Black constituents. And that doesn't mean that we don't need to understand how it affects other constituents. But the reality is that the Black experience in Raleigh is a fairly unique experience based on a long history. Understand how race, class, ethnicity, culture, age, and other characteristics impact constituents' inclination to engage. Engage ethnic, cultural, and socioeconomic populations that have not historically been engaged. Discover ways to inspire the engagement of renters, immigrants, refugees, youth and senior populations, low-income constituents, communities of color, people with limited English-speaking ability, and constituents with limited mobility. And there are all kinds of reasons why people in those populations don't engage. And we have to make sure we don't sort of homogenize everybody into a group called minority people or people at risk, and understand that all of these different groups have unique reasons or unique things that happen to them that either inspire their engagement or not. So the last recommendation under equity, hold on, is that, where are we going? Okay, we're missing a slide, but the next, oh, I think we're good. Yeah, okay, we're good. So we'll move on to strategy 8. Create a community innovation system. Innovation brings together internal and external stakeholders and their collective talents to increase operational efficiency by promoting continuous improvement, collaboration, and citizen-driven programs and services. Create an idea system that inspires constituents, community organizations, and city staff to submit thoughts and ideas about how to improve community engagement programs and services, and that ensures the historical rituals, practices, and behaviors of community engagement don't blind us to new community engagement possibilities, and then perhaps creating an ongoing service, perhaps on a website that is about create a Reimagine Raleigh site. This isn't on the presentation you have. This is just something I had a revelation about today. But create a website where people can consistently send in information about thoughts about reimagining Raleigh. And so I think that that's another thing that fits in the innovation system. Stakeholder communication strategy. As a leader, how you communicate is just as important as why and what you communicate. Effective communication between stakeholders is critical, and this is one of the places where it seems to have all broken down. The primary complaints that I got from talking to constituents are about trust and communication. So effective communication encourages constituents to participate in important decisions that impact the quality of their lives. The Community Engagement Unit and the Department of Communications should lead a discussion to create strategies regarding improving communications between all community engagement stakeholders. That's the city, the council, neighborhood organizations, consultants, it's all of those people. And then ensure the appropriate use of technology as not to replace other forms of engagement. COVID has created a situation where we've become seriously dependent upon technology, but we want to understand that the use of technology should not replace the sort of responsibility we have to actually bring people together and make use of their energy and their intelligence and their emotions. So ensure the appropriate use of technology as not to replace other forms of engagement. Our last recommendation, I think, is community building, celebrations and kinship. The more opportunities we give citizens to gather, the more common ground, shared vision, and shared purpose they have. So part of the innovation system may do this, but create creative, innovative opportunities for residents to gather and engage. Democracy, if about nothing else, has always been about people gathering. It's always been about people coming together to share ideas. And I think we've kind of lost sight of that, and we need to look at how we create creative opportunities for that to happen. And then provide gatherings and special events that result in greater kinship, gatherings in which we learn what we all share and which we learn from our differences, and then And then the final recommendation I have on this that you've heard before that I put on the sheet is having some kind of welcome to Raleigh event. According to what I saw online the other day, 80 new constituents move to Raleigh every day, and that we should have some process or system that engages them when they get here so that they know how to solve problems, so that they know where arts and recreation are, but to get them totally familiar with the city. And in the process of doing that and provide that kind of opportunity for them, then we may have people who want to engage. I've been here for 7 years, and my wife, when we first got here, wanted to volunteer somewhere, and we couldn't really find the place where she would go do that. So those are the 10 recommendations, and we're certainly open for questions. But the idea is that these recommendations come from hundreds of hours of conversations and research about what other people are doing and what people wanted. The intention is that the council discuss these things, decide which of these things are priorities, decide the priorities in the sequence, and then I still think it's important that we put an interdisciplinary core team in the city around this to help the Office of Community Engagement do the work that they're going to be expected to do. And then once you have spoken about this, then we can take this out to community organizations and constituents and ask them about what their feelings are about it, what they think might be changed, again, what we've missed and those kinds of things. So with that, if you got any questions, that's it.
That was a lot to take in. Going to ask if any of our council members have questions of Mickey. Councilor Branch.
Yes, thank you for the presentation and the report. Couple questions on it kind of goes to really slide to strategy 2 and probably strategy 10. As far as what are some, based on your meetings and feedback, ways to bring, I think, the gathering of people in order to support the community and neighborhood organizations?
Yeah. I think that that's what the community is for. I mean, I can talk to you about things that I have seen worked, but I think taking these things out to the community and asking them how they think that they could respond to this is probably a better way to do that. But getting people involved around their issues. I talked to Nick Neptune at Transfer the other day, and we were talking about Transfer as a community gathering place where when people wanted to get together when something comes up, for instance, the things that happened in DC this week, if they wanted to get together and talk about those things, that there would be a venue for that. And it wouldn't necessarily be a facilitated conversation, but there are just all kinds of possibilities. And I don't mean to project myself as a brilliant one about this, but what I'm saying is if we take this out to the constituents that we serve, then I think they'll have all kinds of ideas about city departments. The Department of Parks and Recreation may have lots of ideas about that. So, right here in the moment, I would say that we have to engage people when they're not angry and afraid around things that they care about. We have to go places where people gather, community gardens and those kinds of things, but there are all kinds of possibilities.
All right. Madam Mayor, if I may, just my feedback, I really think, the information we received, a good next step, at least the way I see it, is to have staff take this information and look at these 10 strategies. And one thing that Mr. Fern said is that we have staff that has abilities and the skill set to develop, an action plan to move forward. And that includes engaging the community, I believe, as well. It's time to move and that's my recommendation from what I've heard today. There's a lot more I could say, but I'll stop there.
I think it's more efficient to engage the community now that we have something that they can react to rather than starting from scratch. And I think that even though that wasn't the plan, I think it's a better idea that we have these now and that we can give constituents something to react to.
Thank you, Councilor Branch. Any other questions or comments? Councilor Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Mickey, for bringing this before us. Obviously, we have all been waiting and are excited to get moving on this, if you call it next phase or next stage, and appreciate all the hard work that you put into this with all the public engagement you've done. I know you've had some technical difficulties along the way, and we appreciate that, and I think the public does too. So in 2021, we're ready to get going on this. One question to your slide, preparing for the journey. And I was having some technical difficulties, so I may have missed this, but would you give us your thoughts or recommendation of how more specifically to go about that? And do you see that as the initial step or a parallel process as we go through the strategies? Or do you see that first and then we're starting to work on the strategies, or parallel to working on the strategies?
I see it as parallel. And what that means is if you create new stuff and you put in a foundation that was not created to support the new stuff, then it often doesn't work. It often turns into the old stuff. So I think we need to look at the foundation, how departments think about community engagement, how the city thinks about community engagement, how we budget for community engagement, how it's organized, what's the relationship between the community engagement that planning does and the work that community engagement does. It's looking at all of those things, because if we come out and say, for instance, on the strategy about inclusion, that we're going to create this inclusive public engagement, but the city's strategy about equity and inclusion is not right, then there's no way this is going to be right. And so I'm not sure that I've seen anybody who has done this kind of assessment, but what I really want to be sure about, whether I'm doing this work, anybody else is doing the work, is the foundation that we support can support the new strategies that we're creating, rather than building those strategies on a historical foundation that might not support it.
I have a follow-up question to that, Mickey. Can you explain what you mean by just the structure or the foundation? Do you mean, so for instance, are you talking about where the department is located? Are you talking about the number of people? Are you talking about the budget? I'm just trying to get a better handle on specifically what you mean by that.
All of that. I'm talking about structure, funding, culture, the culture of community engagement. Do people really value it? And so I'm thinking we need to do an assessment, because we need to find out exactly what is and is not there. It's almost like doing a contradiction analysis. This is our current state. This is our preferred state. And now we have to get there. So we need to identify those things that are going to help us get there. And then we need to identify those things that are going to create resistance to us getting there. And so the process is basically like in strategic planning, the classic contradiction analysis process, where you look at where you are and where you want to be, and then you look at what you have, and you look at what's hurting you, and you look at what you need to create.
Okay, Councilor Knight had a follow-up, and then Councilor Cox.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So along those same lines, Mickey, so who specifically or what specifically do you see doing the audit or doing the assessment? Is that internal within staff or staff organization, or is it an external public engagement process?
I think we start internally. I think we start using the resources we have internally. And then if we find out that there are things we can't do, or things we can't get done, then we have to think about engaging other people. But having it internal also gets people in city government to own it, part of it, and about the part of the creation of it. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I may have some other questions as we move through this, but I appreciate it, Mickey. Thank you for all your work so far.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Yes. Hi, Mickey. Hope you're having a good day. Appreciate the information that you presented here today. And I'd like to have some questions regarding the assessment. It seems to me that we probably should, as a first step, should have a discussion about community engagement values, because I think once we clarify the community engagement values, that would actually lay a foundation for any assessment. Would you agree with that? I'm sorry, you're muted, sir.
I don't know how to unmute myself. Am I still muted? Oh yeah.
Fine.
Oh yeah. I think Councilman Cox says absolutely true.
Okay, great. So maybe as a first step, that would be something that we as a council could work on, would be enumerating and clarifying what our community engagement values are.
The definition of community engagement and your values.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Mickey, I have several questions. When you talked about at one point, planning is doing one thing, maybe parks is doing another thing. What I see in community engagement is we work a lot in silos. How do we get to spread this across the organization in a more, what's the word I'm looking for, collaborative way? And I think you mentioned collaboration, but what are some of the means of doing that and achieving that?
Well, I think when you, if you decide to create a community engagement core team and it's interdisciplinary, I think that's where it starts. In my history with community engagement is that even constituents who go get what's called community engagement weary when one department comes out and then the next week another department comes out and then somebody else does something and those things aren't coordinated, and that's just scheduling and calendar. But, and I don't mean to get poetic, but I think I've mentioned this before, that Marshall McLuhan said that, flowers don't bloom in the disciplines, they bloom in the spaces between the disciplines. There's real innovation and creativity in the city of Raleigh. There is some of that in departments, but the real innovation and creativity exists in the spaces between the departments. And if we bring those people together and investigate what's in those spaces, I think that's where we see real creativity and innovation.
Okay, my next question really comes around to some of the groups that you were talking about. You were talking about renters, immigrants and refugees, youth and seniors, low-income residents, communities of color, people with limited English-speaking ability, and those with limited mobility. Okay, so it's one thing to talk about reaching out to them. What are some of the ways of doing that? These are usually communities. I mean, I'll never forget your, when you came to speak to us when we were talking about CACs, when I was on the former council, you talked about the green people.
Yeah.
And, the green people is who we hear from.
Right.
Okay, we say we need to reach out to these groups, but how do you successfully do that? And is that going to be part of what you bring forward to us as far as a strategy is concerned?
Well, first of all, on strategy 7 on the first page, it talks about how understanding how internalized privilege and internalized oppression have affected people's inclination to engage. And that's truer for Black citizens than it is for citizens who are newer. But the idea is that we have to get, and by the way, we have ambassadors that work for the Latinx community, right? I mean, Linda in her shop has somebody who is specifically dealing with Latino people. The reality is that you have to know enough about the culture, the values, the habits of those people to understand who they are before we can influence them to do what we want them to do. We have to understand how we become relevant to them, and then how we show them how engagement is really going to help them. But you can't do it with, but you have to do it with the different constituencies. The African American constituency is real different than the Latinx constituency. Is real different than people who don't have mobility. But it's understanding how all of those things are affecting people's inclination and ability to engage. So part of that's learning, and that's what I'm talking about, that continuous learning process. We need to provide capacity building opportunities for constituents, and then they need to provide those experiences for us so that we understand how to, based on it being relevant to their culture, we understand how to get to them. And I think you can, well, with COVID, there are certainly not a lot of possibilities for getting people together. It's all about getting people together. I mean, a lot of this is about getting people together and getting them to share their stories and their experiences.
Okay.
Now, if any of you ask me tomorrow about what my ideas are about how these things could happen, I have lots of ideas tomorrow. It's just standing here right now in this situation, I'm not calling them up, but I have lots of thoughts and ideas about things that could happen.
Okay. Mickey, one other area you had mentioned was communication. Councilor Cox, I'll get to you next. You talked about communication. We have a communications department. We also have communication folks within departments. I know at one point when we as a city were reinventing our communication structure, what we tried to do was put everything under the communications umbrella. So we had consistency, we had consistency, outreach, we were sending the same message, and it wasn't, again, siloed. I guess that's my favorite word today. You talked about communications. How can communications and community engagement work together to ensure that we have the outcomes we need? And I don't know if you've thought about that or not, but just a question for you.
And this is also, it gets back to that assessment in the foundation, right? If we find out, in fact, that communication is a problem, then why would we create new things that require more communication until we figured that out? So there's this thing that I've worked with in government called managing polarities. And it is especially prominent in parks and recreation organizations. We decentralize the organizations because the people in headquarters don't really know what they're talking about. And so we're going to decentralize, and we're going to have all the stuff happen out there. And then that doesn't work. So then we centralize. And what we do is we trade one set of problems for the other. If you go from one opposite to the other, if you go from decentralized to centralized, you simply trade one set of problems for the other. So what we have to do is find out where that sweet spot is between what happens centrally. Certainly the communications office would be the keeper of the communications values, right? And as cities are as departments are communicating, there's certain values they have to adhere to. Certainly the communications office can provide technical assistance to departments that have to do this. But the reason I'm talking about communication isn't to say the office is broken, but to say that I heard that more than any other thing as I was talking to people, that communications is broken and it somehow needs to be fixed. And I think that getting the community engagement staff together, and I even mean the people who were recently reassigned, even getting those people together with the Office of Communication to talk about, well, how do we do this? But see, the intelligence isn't in me. The intelligence is in the people in the workforce. And when they get together, I can guarantee you that they will come up with solutions. I can guarantee you they'll start coming up with solutions.
And that's where the needs assessment comes in. People working together and collaborating and coming up with those solutions.
And people are collaborating. If they're with each other, they trust each other. It's when you're doing stuff and there aren't people involved who are looking at what you're doing who are saying they must be up to something, see? So the more we get people together to talk about these things, the better the community building experience, I think.
Okay, Councillor Cox.
Yes, Mickey, I appreciate what you mean when you say, come back to you tomorrow and because you have lots of ideas. And so one of the things that I would like to request that you come back with tomorrow is some how we can have the conversations around the community engagement values and how we can clarify those. So if you can do that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, and certainly, this may not happen soon enough, but if we have a core team and then we have people in the community and we all sit down, I don't think we're ever going to sit down in one place again, but if we all look at these things, people are going to come up with what it means and how it ought to be done. I've never seen it fail. But so, yes, I can give you something tomorrow that's sort of a thought about if we were going to create this, how we might go about doing it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. And sorry for the internet glitch here. I've got a few kids on all sorts of different things, so I'm sure that was the problem. Mickey, I really appreciate this conversation and your work on it. One thing I have been thinking a lot about and experiencing a lot, and I think this is a challenging thing to talk about, but I would really like your insight on this, is as we continue to do community engagement, especially in a digital world during COVID, there are folks who show up in every venue and every space we offer. Whether that's our monthly or actually twice monthly public comment periods, whether that's during rezoning processes in front of the Planning Commission, whether that's during community engagement with nonprofits. But it's kind of the same voices in all of these different spaces. And in essence, it wouldn't be a bad thing. However, I have heard from many other folks who we don't engage with normally that say those folks tend to turn them off of engaging with the city and engaging in our processes and our work. And so I'm wondering, I'm sure Raleigh is not alone in this. If there's any kind of thoughts you have to share on that, or lessons learned, or just any response.
Well, yeah. So certainly, if I feel like I've had something imposed on me, or if I feel like I've been deprived of something, or I've been disappointed or betrayed, then the people who did that to me become enemies. And so I begin to treat them not like fellow citizens, but I begin to treat them like somebody who did something to me. And that's why that healing thing is important. And that's why that communication thing is so important. But the way to do this, again, it's about gathering. It's about getting people together. It's about understanding what people's unique issues are and understanding that people have issues in common. It's so complex. And the problem with this is the emotional complexity of it is what ends up paralyzing it. I went to the meeting. I raised my hand. Nobody called on me. I'm never going back to another meeting. And that's an oversimplification, right? But the dynamics of this, and when people are engaged in these processes and they have ideas, when submitting an idea requires courage. And it requires the essence of your being. So you submit your idea and somebody summarily dismisses it. I'm not coming back. See, it's all of those kinds of things. So how do we create processes, even in the community organizations or whatever the organization is that we create? How do we make sure that the values by which they operate are consistent with these values that we're talking about, that they're respecting people, that they're hearing people, that they're not cutting people off? And I guess that would also be true about the council in case that happens sometimes. But yeah, it's the dynamics of community engagement and racial equity are the most complex I have ever seen. And typically people don't want to deal with those dynamics because it's messy and because we're fragile. But I think those are the things we have to start dealing with to make Raleigh a great city, is to transcend those things that other cities are trapped by and create a new reality, reimagine what we're doing.
Councilor Branch?
Yeah, my last comment here is I think we have staff that is probably positioned ready to work on this, to help pull the core values, work with Mr. Fern, work with the community. And I would just recommend that we move forward with that action. And then as a council, we continue our involvement in our role to keep things moving and have Mr. Fern have the list that was requested by Councilman Cox available to start working with this group. If the mayor and city manager, Ms. Adams Davis, if you're prepared to take that on.
Sure, Councilmember Branch. We have, as part of our strategic plan, an initiative that addresses community engagement and in a larger scale, or on a larger scale. We have core teams that work intentionally on key initiatives that come out of our work. So we're positioned to do that. Earlier, you mentioned staff work on these to bring back an action plan. And I just wanted to get clarity on that as to what the expectations are moving forward. I know it's expected that we bring something back in March so that you all will have the opportunity to address the options or alternatives that are out there for the framework or structure that ultimately comes out of this work. And I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page for clarification purposes.
Okay, could we hear from Councilor Melton next before we start responding to that? Councilor Melton.
Thanks. I think my comment actually sort of connects to what the city manager was talking about, because looking through the slides, there's some mention of, we have our community engagement team that exists under, neighborhoods, but this core team, sort of this expanded team from different departments, I think we need to go ahead and authorize staff to move forward with convening that group. And then I think that group can work through, a plan, an actionable pointed plan that can be presented in March. But I would like to go ahead and give the city manager the direction that to convene this core team from different departments, not just the existing group, and so that we can get moving on this. Because I really want to get moving on some tangible, on the ground things we can implement. And then I also just wanted to throw my support behind the parallel process for youth. I think I saw something on that. And I know that we already have some programs. I know we have the youth council. I think this group, our council, has talked at least several times. I think Councilmember Branch has brought up the idea of making sure we're doing a better job of engaging that group. So I just want to throw my support behind that. And then, Councilmember Stewart and I have been working with the city attorney's office on this renter issue. And so, I think one piece of what the core team could bring back is maybe not just things that we can implement as a structure, as an organization, but maybe there are policy changes that we could be making too. And maybe the city attorney's office can have a voice on this community engagement core team, because, the mailed notice to not just property owners is something that the city attorney's office worked with us on. So I think that there are legal issues too that we could help lift some barriers.
And Councilor Melton, that's another one of those things that's in the foundation. Are there policies, procedures, current practices that are in diametric opposition to the things that we're trying to do? Are there historical ways of doing business? And that's sort of a part of what that assessment is.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, Marshall, is the community engagement core team is a priority for next steps. Conducting a needs assessment that determines how we're organized, how we budget for this, what the structure looks like, the culture. On the city council part, defining community engagement and then defining values. And perhaps that's something Mickey can work with us on.
Sure.
And then part 3 would be letting this internal team do their work. The next step would be presenting some of this to the community for feedback
Yes.
and their thoughts.
Yes. Yes. And not wait till the end. Maybe to if there are, maybe with the Office of Community Engagement Council, if you can recommend certain citizens that might be helpful in this process. Of course, the danger in that is the people who don't think you care for them will assume that you won't invite them to be a part of the process, and we don't want that to happen. But I think that we should get community members together, like we're getting a core team together, and have them work parallel, and then come up with the things, and then present them to the community.
Perhaps what would be helpful is if you and the core team came up with some of those members that
Sure.
you reach out to.
Sure. And there have been people who've reached out to me, and when the sequence was going to be different and I wasn't going to get these people engaged before, there are people who reached out to me who wanted to be helpful. And it's amazing to me how many people reached out to me because they wanted to be helpful. So I have some of those people, but I think you're right. The core team could recommend things, and then you can look at it. And if you think something's missing or if it's imbalanced, then you can make recommendations about. The idea is to start getting this done quickly.
Yes. So we had hands raised. It was Councilor Knight, Councilor Cox, then Councilor Melton.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mickey, you may want to comment on this because I know you're aware of this work that's already been done within the city by, within the planning department with the handbook, the public engagement handbook. So I'm going to be interested and intrigued by how that is incorporated possibly if y'all see ways and ideas to do that, because there has been a lot of work already done on public engagement that may be able to be used as we move through this sort of broader process. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I worked on that early on. Early in that process, I actually worked on that, and the handbook is great. But what the handbook does, it's a how-to kind of book. It's if you want to do this, you do that. If you want to do this, you do that. And so I'm going to try to use an analogy. I hope it works. When my son was young, he's about 7 years old. He hated broccoli, and he didn't like it anymore if you moved the broccoli closer to him. In other words, making the broccoli more accessible wasn't the answer. He don't like broccoli, right? So all of those things that are in that report about how to, we still have to look at it about what is broken in the constituency, because they're looking at community engagement and go, why? Well, some people are never going to get engaged. Some people engage when they're angry, afraid. Some people don't engage because they did once and they got disappointed. So there are all those kinds of things, but we still have to inspire people to engage. And there's no question that in that handbook is a process that says, and when you're going to engage people, this is what you do. But there are other things we need to fix too.
It seems to me, Councilor Knight, that would be part of the discussion with the core team. I mean, it will be those types of tools that get brought to the table and those types of discussions that occur.
And yes, Madam Mayor, to your point and back to Mickey's point, I think there is a way to, with all that work that's been done and a lot of public engagement around that, to look at ways and pieces of that can be incorporated in this larger process and how to connect those two together.
Or even using those things that are in that book to convene groups of people to help us talk about this.
Yep. All right, we had Councilor Cox next.
Yes, I just wanted to get some clarification about how we determine the membership of the core team.
Well, I can tell you, and I have formed core teams like 7 or 8 times. There are some criteria that I have about what makes a good core team member. This is another thing I can send to you. I'm not going to think of all of them, but a core team member, it's a cross-functional team, so it comes from a number of different departments. The important thing is that the people who are appointed to it have the capacity to deal with the difficult dynamics that are going to occur in the conversation. So I don't mind, for instance, having in the people who are diametric or in diametric disagreement with me, as long as they're positive, as long as it's aspirational, as long as we want to. And you need to have different kinds of people. So you need to have, I don't know if you looked at Myers-Briggs or personanalysis, that kind of stuff. There need to be people who care about people. There need to be people who understand systems. There need to be people who are creative. There need to be people who get work done. So, and I have a schematic that includes all of that. But the question is, are you asking the question, who makes the decision about who those people are? Or,
yeah.
Okay, all right.
I would think that would be the role of the city manager.
Okay.
And are these all staff people?
Madam Mayor, I think there's probably some miscommunication or confusion. To my understanding, Councilman Cox, there's a staff team and then there's individuals from the community that are coming as well to work with staff. So there will be a staff team that the city manager will have authority over. And then as far as the community team, that I think, as always, that comes back to council to make the final decision.
But the team.
Can we let Mickey respond to this, please?
Yeah,
Thank you.
the core team is an internal team. It's an interdisciplinary team. It's a team of people who think in different ways, who've had different kinds of experiences. But it has to be rich. It has to be people who are willing to communicate. It has to be people who are willing to disagree with each other and get by it. So but that's the city team. If I was talking about creating a community team, I couldn't put all of those things on it. But if we're talking about the city, we have some control, right? And so that's what I'm thinking. And then at some point in time, we may get the community team and the core team together. We may put those teams together at some point, which will really be really a very fascinating experience, and I think really great, really good.
Councilor Melton?
Just want to ask Mickey, you talked a couple of times about trust, about needing to reestablish trust. I understand trust is something that's earned. How do you see the trust or perceived lack of trust playing into this process moving forward? Do you have ideas of steps that we can take to help sort of bridge that gap? And just thinking out loud, one thing I thought of while I was waiting to ask the question is this idea of this community group. I can see that as an opportunity to be working with folks. I get what you're saying with people who feel that they've been hurt or wronged, extending a seat at the table, especially to some folks who are the biggest critics of this process, I think could be very helpful. I don't think it's healthy to live in an echo chamber, to be surrounded by people who think exactly the way you do. I want the person who's the most opposed to these changes to be at that table to help sort of drive some of the discussion. But I'm wondering if you have other ideas about this trust issue.
Well, so there's always a question about whether trust is earned or whether trust is owed. Personally, I think trust is owed. I don't ever try to get anybody's trust. I just am who I am. And if over a period of time you decide you trust me, that's a good thing. But I'm not going to any unusual means to try to get people to trust me. I think trust is created by people having real experiences with each other and getting together and being with other. And as you just said, Councilor Melton, getting those people who are the most severe critics of this process together with the people who desperately wanted to change. I think the thing that I have seen that brings people together and changes them more than any other single thing is service. When people do service together. And I'm talking about work service and I'm talking about other kinds of service, but when people do service together, they begin to learn about each other in different ways. So again, the more ways we can find to get people together, the greater the trust, the better the communication. So, and there's just any one of a number of ways to do that. We can get them involved around their issues. We can bring them together around their issues. I find that when people get together in cultural tribes, and a cultural tribe is the activity or people around which you feel the most alive. I have seen people who hate each other when they get in their cultural tribe. They have that thing in common and it works, right? So we just have to find these ways to bring people together. Maybe it is service, maybe it is work programs, maybe, but it's something where people get together and they see each other not as caricatures, but as real human beings. You know, it's they see each other as real people. They can't just be dismissive because of something they saw on television or something they heard.
Okay. All right. Mickey, great job. Thank you. One idea that I really loved that you brought up was the Welcome to Raleigh event. We do have so many people new to our community, and having them be able to access information, I think, would be really helpful. Those principles might also apply, though, to those already living here.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
but I love the concept, and I love the idea. I know Seattle did something, a booklet, where you could go find pretty much any city service that
Right.
was available. So anyhow, I'm just going to reiterate then, core team, assessment, public input, the three takeaways, and then for the council's part, to find community engagement and also discuss our values around that, with Mickey helping us with those discussions.
And I'll work with the core team on the values, and then I'll work with you guys on the values, and then we'll see how they integrate.
Okay, that sounds terrific. Thank you, everyone. This is, and Mickey, I know that you had some personal issues that made it difficult getting through some of this process. Welcome back. I'm glad things are in a better place.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you. This has not been an easy task, especially with COVID. But I really like the thoughtfulness that you put in today's presentation. So we're off and running.
All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. All right. Our next topic, also an important topic, is the housing bond update. And we have Larry Jarvis here to talk to us.
Mayor, members of council, it's good to be here.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, all of you. So our agenda today is to have a review of the upcoming policy and program decisions, look at FY22 budgeting and 5-year phasing recommendations, and we're going to talk about a proposed ongoing role for the Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee. So to remind everyone of the 5 buckets or elements that were approved as a part of the bond referendum in the fall, and again, $80 million, 72% of the voters in support, which is the highest level of support that we've ever had for a housing bond issue historically. So looking first at the transit-oriented site acquisition bucket with $16 million, what we're suggesting is to front load the first 2 years as follows: $6 million annually for direct city acquisition of sites, and then $2 million annually for acquisition and preservation of existing affordable units through an RFP process. So the RFP parameters and the evaluation factors would be approved by council prior to issuing the RFP. We're suggesting maybe 2 cycles annually. And then the responses and the recommendations would come back to council as a result of that RFP. Looking at the public-private partnerships bucket, which was $28 million, we'd be looking at phasing that over 5 years as follows. In FY22, $3 million for healing transitions, which we've already approved. $7 million for a permanent supportive housing project by way of an RFP process. And then beginning in FY22, $2 million annually for small-scale nonprofit projects using an RFP process, where at least 1/3 of the units would serve renters at 30% AMI or below. And again, that would be subject to an RFP that would be approved by council. And again, 2 cycles annually is what we're anticipating. Then beginning in FY23, $2 million annually for a voluntary inclusionary rental project or projects near transit, where at least 20% of the units are affordable at 60% AMI, or missing middle homeownership opportunities near transit. And again, the guidelines would be subject to future council approval. So for the low-income housing tax credit gap financing, $4.8 million annually each year over the next 5 years. And again, the policy guidance that council gave us previously is that the minimum income targeting would be 25% of the units in 9% tax credit projects, and 10% of the units in 4% tax credit projects would be at 30% AMI. The bucket for the owner-occupied home rehabilitation program, which is $6 million. This is an expansion of an existing program to LMI owners near future transit investments. We're suggesting that we begin that in FY23 at $1.5 million annually. Noting here that this requires a geographic boundary delineation, which will be determined through station area and other equitable development around transit planning efforts. Same thing with the down payment assistance program, which is a program that's an expansion to help buyers acquire properties near future transit improvements. Again, we would suggest starting that in FY23, $1.5 million annually. Same thing, we have to have geographic boundary delineation. But additional future policy considerations for council would be a purchase price limit. As a point of reference, with our federal funds right now, the purchase price limit is $265,000. We might want to look at 320 or some other figure, 350, whatever. And we might want to look at the amount of assistance. Right now, it's limited to $20,000. So the total bond amount that would be budgeted for FY22 and included in the CIP starting for July 1 will be $24.8 million. And then looking now at our suggestions for the continuing role of the Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee. And we would see them staying with the bond through the 5-year implementation period. We're suggesting quarterly meetings with staff where they would provide input on proposed policies. They would receive progress reports, ask any questions that they have so they can share that back into the community. We would expect them to monitor consistency with their priorities and their recommendations. But rather than a full committee, we're suggesting an executive subcommittee of the Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but these again are just staff recommendations.
Councilmember Cox.
Yes, regarding the $28 million for public-private partnerships, we have, beginning in fiscal year 23, $2 million annually for voluntary inclusionary rental near transit or missing middle homeownership opportunities near transit. So those are the, and we're talking about 20% of units of affordable at 60% AMI. And in the paragraph before that, we talk about 30% AMI. But there's no discussion about the 30% AMI being located near transit. So can you clarify that? So, I mean, in the last paragraph, when we talk about units being located near transit, are we anticipating any units targeting 30% AMI being near transit?
In the public-private partnerships bucket, there was a desire for a pot of money that would assist nonprofits with smaller projects, basically anywhere in the city, where some percentage of those 20% would be available at 30% AMI, not necessarily tied to transit. The transit focus here are primarily in some of the other buckets and other activities. Did I understand your question?
Yes, and you answered it correctly. And I have to say that I disagree with that, because if anyone needs transit, it's people who are earning 30% AMI. And we need to prioritize 30% AMI so that they are near transit. I don't think we can just place them anywhere in the city. I think we have to give priority to them to be near transit.
Again, the first bucket is site acquisition for tax credit projects. And then in the tax credit gap financing is where we have the 30% AMI targets. So I think we're not doing that in every instance, but I think there are certainly throughout this several places where, to the extent feasible, we are giving preference and priority to 30% AMI.
But we're not really making a commitment to that. And I really think we need to make a commitment to that, sir.
I'm going to ask that we tamp it down a little. I think, Larry, what you've laid out is very fair and practical and takes us through a process. We can't do everything all at once, and this is a 5-year plan. One question I did have, though, if COVID has kind of elevated anything in my mind, it's how we really still need to do more to help our homeless community. We have Oak City Cares. We have seen that shelters don't work. What I did see work was a hotel that, the Healthy Hotel, that the county did, Triangle Family Services managed that. The data that came out of that was amazing. It was supportive services, help people get back on their feet, on their medications, help them get the resources they need. And the reentry program for housing was, I mean, I don't remember ever seeing stats like that in my life. Have we given any thought or talked to the county about how we might be innovative in housing our homeless community? Are there opportunities, say, to buy a hotel that is that provides support services? We've seen this work. Not only have we seen it work, we've seen it work really well. So I'm just wondering if there's any innovative ideas that we are considering, and how and what kind of conversations we're having with the county.
Going back to the $7 million, that is $7 million that's in here for permanent supportive housing, we've had conversations not only with the county, but with potential partners for how that might work. And the population that would be targeted, and one of the proposals that we're looking at is that some of the units would be reserved for the chronically homeless, typically with very substantial supportive service needs, including those that are suffering from mental illness, but also the hotel population, to get families out of hotels and get them into housing, and particularly targeting those folks that are living in hotels primarily because of barriers that they have to being able to participate in the market. There we're talking about people who are in hotels because of bad credit, eviction histories, those types of things. So we are very much looking at all of those things.
Okay.
Also within the tax credit projects for applicants to get funds from the county, they have to agree to accept and set aside a certain percentage of the units for the county's voucher holders. And again, the voucher holders typically are folks who might have been homeless or who have significant supportive service needs or other barriers to housing.
Okay, I just want to make sure as we're looking through this, first off, we don't miss any opportunities and that we're open to innovation and trying new things. So,
Absolutely.
okay, Council Member Branch.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Larry, for the information. Just a question. Can you briefly kind of explain how the gap financing is graded and what role transportation plays in that? And I'm asking that because I know we have goals specifically for 30% AMI projects under that category. So what role does transportation play in the scoring of those projects?
Well, it's not so much the scoring of the project, but under housing location policy, if a project is otherwise located in an area of concentration, the trump card that gets them out of that is proximity to existing frequent service or a future transit station. So it's already very much geared towards making sure that we align our investments in affordable housing and transit as much as we can. So
Okay,
it's already linked pretty strongly.
Thank you.
Next was Council Member Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Jarvis, thank you for your presentation. Broadly, I think it's very good, and it reflects what the community resoundingly endorsed this past fall in approving the bond. A couple thoughts and reactions to what I've heard. I think the hotel with supportive housing idea is a very intriguing one. I think it holds a lot of opportunity, although that specific tactic is maybe new to us or new to me at least, or new to the community. The basic concept of providing people housing first is not new. Dating back to a George W. Bush program that was then called the 10-year plan to end homelessness. And you're right, Mayor, there is lots of data out there that says if you get people in housing first, it helps with all the other challenges they may be facing in their life. You mentioned a few, Larry. And so along those lines with innovation and opportunities that we maybe have not thought about yet, I wonder, Larry, what we might do if presented with an incredible opportunity that is, let's just assume it's broadly recognized as an incredible opportunity to, let's say, purchase a large site near a transit line. What kind of adjustments would we make to take advantage of an opportunity like that is just so good in terms of the opportunities for housing, the proximity to transit, but assuming it's going to be a very large purchase that might call on us to reconsider our allocation? How might we deal with that possibility if it ever happens?
Well, one of the things, well, there are several things that we need to keep in consideration here. One is that we don't want to create a large concentration of very low-income people, particularly very low-income people with particular challenges. I think we would be creating, unintended consequences there that we might not want to, but not necessarily looking at, mega sites, but maybe looking at sites where we can accommodate some projects of a type that we typically have not done. We really haven't looked at micro units and SROs, which are not that different from a lot of hotel rooms. But I think there's an opportunity to look at the broader range of housing types and making those a part of the solution as well.
Can I get my tiny home village then?
We will look at it, maybe not with bond dollars. I would suggest looking at it with other dollars, but that's on our agenda to look at, yes.
Okay. Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Larry, for the presentation. This looks like a lot of exciting possibilities ahead for the city around affordable housing. Going back to the permanent housing for the, I guess, chronically homeless population, 7 million. I know there's at least one big project that's getting going and is going to need our help, and I'm hearing there may be others along these lines. What are you basing the 7 million budget for that line item on? Just thinking that it may not be enough, but can you give me a little bit more detail about the basis of the 7 million?
That basically was, if you wanted to do a unit of 50, a project of 50 units, and we had no other forms of the subsidy, how much we need to set aside. So I actually think it's for 50 units, that's kind of a conservative figure, but that's kind of the starting point. But again, we are having conversations about potential projects that would be more than 50 units. That figure also didn't assume financial participation by the county, but we need to have larger conversations because the Housing Authority also needs to be part of this project, and we hope to pull the Housing Authority in and make them a part of it, because for this type of project to be viable over the long term, we really do need to make project-based vouchers a part of the structure of the project.
Okay, thank you, and look forward to hearing more about that.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart?
Thank you, Mayor. Larry, I have just one question, and I'm sure there's an absolutely good reason for this, but I have to ask. One of the best tools I know we have as a city in preventing displacement is the owner-occupied home rehab program. And we're saying here that we're not going to start funding that from this bond until 23. And so I'm wondering why not sooner?
Well, we have our existing homeowner rehab program, okay? And right now we are constrained by the number of rehab contractors. We have been attempting to recruit rehab contractors. We need to add to that. But again, given that for that future program for owner occupants near transit improvements, there needs to be a geographic delineation of whatever that boundary is going to be. And we're not in a position to draw that line until a little bit further along in some of our planning, some of our transit related planning efforts. We need to draw a line in the sand. Otherwise, how do you know if someone's eligible or not?
Great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, Larry, I want to thank you for your presentation, the work done on this. I also want to thank the Housing Bond Committee for all their work, and I want to thank the voters who approved this by 72% of the vote. That is a statement. It's a statement of need. It's a statement of trust. And I'm just can't say enough about how we as a community have come together on this very important topic. I sat in on Launch 2021 today. It was the Raleigh Chamber's economic forecast. And speaker after speaker reiterated the need for housing, the need for affordable housing. And, you know, I think we're pretty well positioned to at least get a jump start on this. We have, as we've said, a number of people who move here every single day, new to the area. The only way we're going to keep our area affordable is to continue, first off, working with our home builder community to ensure that we have housing choice, but also working with them to assure we have housing affordability. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for getting us to this moment and looking forward to the next steps. Thank you. Okay, those were our two topics for today's really important discussion. We will see you all here next Tuesday for our work session and city council meeting at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Raleigh and Wake County are among the fastest growing places in the nation. 63 people move to Wake County every day. In an average year, the city of Raleigh will issue permits for 5,000 new housing units and about 5 million square feet of commercial floor space. To put that in context, that's the equivalent of 25 apartment buildings, like these buildings here next to Cameron Village, and 10 Wells Fargo towers. Increasingly, Raleigh's growth is landing in places that we